Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So colours are up on the screen and we'll get to it. This project is something that I had initially rage quit due to, well, frustration with it. It's my Guild Ball Butchers project. So to start we'll just start with the base coats and wait for it. Yep, that's why I rage quit. It's because the miniatures themselves are spindly as hell. I have a lot of difficulty pinning them, so I don't, and as a result any rough handling results in breakages. So yeah, they're quite spindly as well, so it makes pinning, at least I find, rather impractical. So yeah, just applying the base coats, and since I'm using predominantly P3 paints, it does take a while, as in terms of getting very transparent layers, P3 is one of the best, but in terms of laying down a solid base coat first time or with minimal layers, it's probably one of the worst. So it's just a paint you use if you're willing to put in the necessary patience to use it. So yeah, as emphasized by the title, I'm also trying to speed paint this a bit, so I'm often going to jump between various things. As one particular layer is drying, I'll start on another thing. So I started with the basic shirt tunic thing, and now I'm moving on to the trousers, which, the shirt I've done in Corn Red, and the trousers I've done in, I'm doing in Hammerfell Khaki. As with all P3 base coats, it'll take 3 to 4 layers to get a solid coat going on. So yeah, this is actually quite boring and it's a laborious process, so for the most part I will skip over it until the point where I start to work on something more interesting and varied, so catch you in a moment. Okay, so the base coat of the trousers and shirt are done, and we'll do the same thing for the flesh because both of those are currently drying. So the base layer flesh is Midland flesh, and again 3 to 4 coats until I'm satisfied that the overall coverage is sufficient for a solid base coat. Okay, now moving on to the shading. So for the shade, I'm doing the shirt's shade layer with Sanguine base. So I did try that Ben Comet's loaded brush technique, but it didn't really work. So in the end, I just got a rough 50-50 mix of the base coat of Scorn Red and Sanguine base, and gradually painted that into the recesses. And as I got deeper and deeper into the layers, I put more and more emphasis on the shade color until I felt I had a sufficient level of shade going. I'm also using glazed medium every now and then to thin my shade layers in order to prevent it going on too, starkly, I suppose. That's a terrible word, but you sort of know what I mean, I imagine. Basically, it's to try and get the paint particularly transparent and make sure it's a gradual transition from the base shade to the from the base color to the shade color. So yeah, it's the usual deal for shading. Just focus on the deep recesses and you're good. So the highlighting, so my initial attempt screwed up, so decided to quickly redo it. So yeah, I'm not highlighting with yellow or anything like that. Since I wanted to make this clothing and give it a bit more of a potentially washed out kind of feel as the dye wears off, I decided to highlight with white instead. So what I'm doing is just mixing in small amounts of, I believe it's Menoth White highlight until I'm happy with the result, and gradually building it up on the areas most exposed to light, such as the tops of the shoulders, the folds in the cloth, etc., and so on. I've also mixed in a little bit of glazed medium into this to make sure I can get a transparent, basically make sure a lot of the base coat on the lower layers, on the mid-tone, is still visible. So yeah, and as I'm building up the highlights, I add more and more of the Menoth White highlight each turn until I'm somewhat happy with the shade I've got. And yeah, generally, if I feel that I've taken the shade too far, I go back in with the Scorn Red, again, a bit of Glaze Medium mixed in, and reapply the base color. Alright, so just slightly off camera, you can see me, I got lazy with the trousers, and what I'm doing is I'm basically put in a wash mixed in with Guncore Brown, or no, it was Umbral Umber, yeah, which are basically, it's like it's the same effect as a wash, but slightly more soft. Anyway, so here I am restoring the base Hammerfell khaki color, so nothing too fancy, just pick out all the intermediate areas with your with the base color and leave the wash in the recesses. My trick with doing this sort of thing, oh yeah, and you can also see that I've just using a base layer of the glaze with my shade color mixed in to paint the underside of his trousers to basically give the impression of shade. So yeah, my hobby hack is if I want to shade a color and I'm feeling a bit lazy, oh yeah, I'm highlighting this these trousers with Jackbone, by the way. So yeah, if I'm feeling a bit lazy, what I'll do is I'll mix a small amount of color into a predominantly glaze medium mix and just treat that like a wash, because that'll provide a shade which is more in tune with the paint range, rather than just, you know, providing a fairly messy overall tint if you use a dedicated wash product like Agrax Earthshade or one of the Army Painter soft tones. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, here I am applying the Jackbone, so again, emphasizing very thin lines along the creases of the trousers. And other than that, not particularly a hard thing to do. So yeah, beginning the shade layer on the flesh. Again, this is the base was Midland Flesh. This is Khardic Flesh with mixed in with glaze medium. So I'll just basically apply that in a similar manner and let it dry like a wash. And moving on to more base coating. So I'm going to do all the leather areas, a mixture of Bloodstone and Umbral Umber and Battlefield Brown. So yeah, it's nothing fancy. Again, P3 paint, 3 layers to get a good coverage, and move on. Also, his boots have some spats of a sort. That color I'm using for those is I think straight Guncore Brown. Anyway, so yeah. I always thought the detail on the Guild Ball minis was a bit soft, especially around the face, so I wasn't trying to go particularly high qualities, and I wanted to get through my pile, so this was a quick figure that I thought I'd pick up while letting a whole bunch of miniatures I put a wash in, I had done a wash for dry. So anyway, I'm moving on to reapplying the midtones for the flesh, this time with Midland Flesh, and later on I'll go back in with my highlight color of Rin Flesh, sorry, and just apply it to the tips of the nose, the bottom of the chin, and the cheekbones, just to get the basic highlighting going. Okay, so with the flesh done, I'm redoing the hair. So the color I'm using is just Thalma Black. Now, like a moron, I'd completely forgotten to demonstrate the hair, so the method I used was highlight with coal black, then gradually mix in layers of Frostbite, picking out the larger parts of the hair to emphasize color, until I was happy with the result. So yeah, moving right along. Rather than get the dedicated P3 shade colors for all of my leather parts, I got lazy and just put some Army Painter dark tone on them. It does well enough, and then reapplied the base colors to bring back the mid-tone. If I wanted to do proper shading and highlighting by gradually working in a transition for all the leather areas, this would have taken me probably another half a day to get done, and I kind of have a lot of projects to get done over these holidays, so one has to find that trade-off between time and quality. So to highlight the bloodstone areas, I'm mixing in a bit of, I believe it's Moldy Ochre, but not too much, just to still leave it mostly bloodstone, but to start to give that impression of a highlight. So you can see me applying that highlight to the finger, along the fingers, atop the very top post edges of the boots, and the upper edges of all the belts and leather armor portions. I believe for the apron and other dark brownish armor parts, I mixed a lot of Guncore Brown into the base colors of Umbral Umber and Battlefield Brown to gradually lighten it up. So generally I just work the highlights until I feel as if they're sufficient for my purposes, and then move on with my life. Yeah, towards the end it's careful work. You just have to get the very sharpest edges and be very careful not to hit the deeper areas. Because I did have some trouble reapplying some of the midtones to that upper shoulder pad part, so I had to go back in and reapply the shades and highlights to that at some point. I think I did that off camera anyway. So yeah, you can see me applying the highlights to the brown leather at this point, as I'd mentioned earlier. And again, I think leather is always, especially for this model, and I'm willing to bet many of the other Guild Ball models, probably one of the biggest time sinks in terms of getting a solid paint job done. And again, he's got goggles, so I'm going to do these in Battlefield Brown. So again, this time being especially careful not to mess up the skin, and I also had to paint a little more detail where for the straps as they wrap around his head, and they're not quite sculpted in, so I had to improvise a bit there. So yeah, I'm going to highlight it in the exact same manner as I did the apron and other dark brown leather bits. So yeah, it's just a matter of being a bit more careful and making sure you don't mess up the work that you've already done for the flesh and the hair. Okay, again, I'd completely forgotten to record painting the metallics. I did the blades and a lot of the buckles and clasps with pig iron, and some of the handles and fittings of the blades in, I believe it was brass balls? Or no, molten brass, yes. So yeah, once the metals were dry, I put a layer of Army Painter dark tone over them, and I'm just gonna let it dry, just to make it look a little more dirty and used, and get some shade going for the metals. Okay, so we're going to start working on the highlights for the blades. So the highlight color is cold steel, and I'm only going to hit the edges of the blades and some of the more prominent clasps and buckles with this color. So yeah, just you all know how to do edge highlighting by now if you're watching this channel, I am pretty sure. So yeah, just pick it out, make them look, make them pop, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, I believe for the handles, I'd actually relayered the molten brass and then did another highlight layer of brass balls. You can also see well, in the brief sections that it's in frame, at some point I went ahead and did the hair, so you can see the end result. So yeah, this model I find suffers from a lot of excessive detail, I think, in some respects. Like, you're always finding buckles and clasps and bits and pieces which you have to go back and do again. So yeah. Anyway, I'm also going to base this model in the usual manner I do. First, German camo black brown, heavily watered down to get it into the basing material on the slaughter base, and then I do an overbrush of flat earth basically overbrush it until I'm happy with the coverage. Then I dry brush dark sand over it to get the highlight going. So very simple, and it works. And finally, I'm going to line the base with just basic black, just to clean it up and make it look well, just clean, really. So yeah, that's pretty much done, so I'll do all of the grass off camera, and there you go. That's our Guild Ball, I think is boiler? I really should check the box before I record this audio, but it's over on the other side of the room and I can't be bothered. So yeah, that's done. So a usual departure from my basing is I only do patches of grass normally. Since this is like a Blood Bowl, like fantasy sport kind of mini, I did the entire base in grass, and I don't think it looks that great. But another thing I tried to emphasize was painting some like field markings on the ground by just getting some basic Vallejo white and doing a couple of intersecting lines on the base. So yeah, I think the effect turned out pretty well. I just had to try and tease the grass back upright once the paint was down. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This project from start to finish was only about a day, and even then not an entire day, as well, it was done during the holidays and I was going back and forth from my room to do family stuff. So yeah, for a fairly minimum effort with minimum amount of care, I think that turned out quite well. There's certainly less stuff that I have to get through in terms of my painting backlog now, so I'm happy about that. So again, thanks for watching if you've made it this far, and I hope you got something out of this. I'm not sure what I'll be doing for my next video, as I've mostly got my bolt action to power through, and I've already done a video for that, so I guess it'll be a while until the next one. I'll catch you all later.